Enter Piers Morgan. Piers Morgan Uncensored, the host, British TV presenter. He has a number of great columns out. I'm going to get to that in just a second. But Piers, good to see you.
Thank you, Neil. Great to be back with you.
Let me ask about these hearings and what effect they're having. When I referred to the president, the former president, leading by a country mile, it was over his likely Republican challengers, but not by nearly as much as it used to be. And more than half Republicans now favor someone other than Donald Trump being their standard bearer in a couple of years. What are we to make of that?
Well, I think it's a fascinating moment for the Republican Party, because I've seen some evidence in some of the polls that the only way that Joe Biden could cling on to power is actually if the Republicans choose Donald Trump again as their nominee, because Trump brings with him so much baggage, and that baggage is being reinforced drip by drip by drip from these hearings. And of course, if you compare him to somebody like the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, he is very Trumpian in policy, but has none of this baggage. And he doesn't have all the inflammatory rhetoric, all the mad tweeting. He doesn't have January 6th hanging over him like a sword of Damocles. And so I think if you're a Republican right now, you're looking at this thinking, do we need all the hassle of Donald Trump again? And are we, by choosing him potentially as our nominee again, are we opening the door to the only way that Joe Biden could potentially win? Would it galvanize, for example, the Democrat base more than any other nominee we could put up if it's Donald Trump? Are we safer going with a younger, more dynamic version of Trump without all the chaos and madness that surrounds him? So that's the calculation the Republicans have to make. And I wrote a column for the New York Post last week, saying it may be time to dump the Don and run with the Ron.
Yes, I remember we chatted after that, and that got responses from all sorts of people, including the former president. But, you know, just when people think they can figure you out, Piers, I see your column today in which you expound on the president's aging, this president's aging. You say he sometimes loses his train of thought. He has trouble summoning names. He appears momentarily confused. That's me every day, Piers. So I'm just wondering, how much is that resonating, you know, among people? Obviously, 64% of Democrats now, not just for the aging reason, but where we are with the economy and all, are worried. They're getting very, very worried.
Yeah, well, of course they're getting worried, because I think they're facing a tremendous shellacking in the midterms, and that, I think, will bring with it a momentum to a crushing defeat in the general election in 2024 if they're not very, very careful. I think my position about Joe Biden is that the New York Times piece at the weekend, a very in-depth analysis from very well-sourced people to the White House chief correspondent of the Times, made devastating reading. This wasn't a Republican hit job. This is from a newspaper and a journalist who've been bending over backwards, to be very fair to Joe Biden, when there's been lots of evidence that he's been a complete disaster. He's only 18 months into his tenure, and already 2/3 of Democrats do not want him to lead the party into the next election. That's about as damning an indictment as you could get. But you look at also at the poll that came out at the weekend as well, that it's the discontent of the American people. You know, I think 80% think the country's going in the wrong way now. Only 13%, and I'd love to know who these people are, think the country's going in the right direction. Every metric you look at for Joe Biden is terrible. But if I was an American voter, I'd be looking at just his general demeanour and behaviour. It seems to me like it's not so much a question of his age, but his ability to function. And I think that ability has been seen to slow down and deteriorate in the last 18 months. It's a massive job. We know that. It aged Barack Obama, who was a young rock star at the start and a grey-haired old man by the end of it. So this is a very tough job for anybody, but even tougher if you come into it, I think, in the condition that Joe Biden is, which is somebody who I think, sadly, is showing his age in a ever more deteriorating manner.
You know, I just wonder, though, whether Republicans risk getting a little ahead of their electoral skis. I can remember after the '94 drubbing that Bill Clinton experienced in the midterms, he was given up for political dead meat. We all know he went on to win re-election fairly handily. And the same was said of Barack Obama when he lost all of those seats, that he was going to have the battle of his life on his hand a couple of years later, he survived that appreciably. Even Ronald Reagan, at the midway point of his presidency, the first term, when Republicans lost a lot of seat, inflation was still running out of control, the recession, you name it. Now, the difference there is he came back in a big, big way. So I'm wondering if there's anything you could see happening here that could reverse this. You talked about the prospect of Republicans nominating a Donald Trump. But is there a risk that they buried Biden too soon?
No, I think the risk is if the Democrats don't bury him themselves. I think that's the problem. And I mean politically bury him. I think that the issue really for the Democrats is surely now, if Joe Biden is not the person to win the next election, then should you be considering the nuclear option of a 25th Amendment intervention to actually remove him from office? Then the question becomes, well, who would take over? And there's no obvious person to do that. But I really think the Democrats are in very serious trouble. And by comparison to the scenarios you just painted with the previous presidents, look at the state of the economy. This is about as bad as it could be for any incumbent president. You've got raging inflation, raging gas prices, raging prices at the supermarket. Everyone's feeling the pinch in America, and they want someone to blame.
But
and they're blaming Joe Biden.
Piers, you still have a strong job
Joe
market.
Biden's,
You still have a strong
Joe Biden's
job
response
market,
is to
right?
blame everybody else.
Yeah. All right, I just wanted to leave you that pregnant pause. Let me ask you one quick question on Boris Johnson. The one thing I notice in Britain, of course, you have this parliamentary system. It's to be admired. It's quick. It's ruthless. But there's no automatic backup person, right? There are, I guess, half a dozen, maybe more, vying for the job. How does it look, and how soon?
We have 8 candidates as of about 20 minutes ago. They announced that 8 people who are Conservative members of Parliament have reached the threshold of having 20 other Conservative MPs who've supported them in the first round. So that was the minimum number you needed to progress to the next stage. So we're down to the final 8. I would imagine that very quickly, maybe as soon as tomorrow, we'll be down to 4. And of those, we should have the final 2 by next Wednesday. The significance of that day being that's the day that the UK Parliament goes into summer recess for the rest of the summer. So the Conservative Party, who are the incumbent party of government, they will want to get their final 2 in place by next Wednesday. And then the final 2 will then go out for the next 5-6 weeks campaigning on the hustings up and down the country, where they try and persuade Conservative members, and there's about 100,000 Conservative paid-up members of the public who are members of the party. They will ultimately make the decision about who becomes Prime Minister. And my money right now would be that one of those candidates will be Rishi Sunak, who has been Chancellor throughout the pandemic.
That's right.
I think he's a very smart guy. He understands the economy better than most. And you might appreciate this, I think, Neil, that with your business brain. But there's a real battle, I think, for the soul of where this party needs to go to get Britain out of this current economic meltdown that we're in. And most of the candidates, if not all of them, apart from one, believe that the answer is to dramatically slash taxes. But Sunak has gone back in history to when Margaret Thatcher first came to power. And although she's known as a big tax cutter, that came later in her administration. And in fact, to start with, she raised taxes when Britain was having a very tough time economically to get us back into a better shape economically so she could then cut the taxes in the way she wanted. Sunak has been spending a lot of time with people who were in Margaret Thatcher's government, and I think he understands that the more likely way we can come out of this and not go into a prolonged, deeper recession is actually not to cut taxes now, but if anything, to slightly raise them, get more income coming in, and then when the economy recovers, then you cut them. And that's the pledge he's making. But he's a lone wolf in this regard. So I think he'll be one of the final 2. And of the others, honestly, you could take any one of them. I think we'll know by tomorrow that there'll be 3 others to choose from, and one of them will come through. But right now, I would think the most likely person to be the next British Prime Minister is Rishi Sunak.
Where does Boris Johnson go?
Well, it's very interesting because Boris Johnson right now remains in number 10 Downing Street.
Right,
he hasn't actually resigned as Prime Minister. He's only resigned as a leader of the Conservative Party. So he wants to stay in Downing Street now for the next 2 months as this whole process unfolds. But the Labour opposition party are trying to table a motion of no confidence in the government, but they've, I think, made probably a strategic error. They've said, we have no confidence in the government as long as Boris Johnson remains Prime Minister. And so Boris Johnson has gone back and said, well, in that case, I'm not going to allow you to have this motion, which is in his power. So there's now a huge battle raging over whether Labour has the right to table a motion of no confidence in Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. I don't think they're going to be successful, and I think the most likely outcome is that Boris Johnson will remain Prime Minister until September the 5th, which is when the Conservative Party system has said that they will announce their next Prime Minister. So it's a bizarre state of affairs, Neil, where you have a Prime Minister, an incumbent Prime Minister, who's had to quit as leader of his party because 61 of his own ministers, including his most senior cabinet members, all resigned in the space of 2 days. And yet he remains Prime Minister. It's an unprecedented and, in my view, completely unfathomable situation.
It is what it is, though. My staff had highlighted, by the way, in your Biden article where you wrote, his speeches are flat and listless, and he stumbles so often during them that staffers hold their breath to see if he makes it to the end without a gaffe. That is my staff every day with me, Piers. So no wonder why they highlighted it.
You know what? You would make a cracking president, Neil.
There we go.
I'd vote for you if I was an American citizen.
This was really fun stuff, Piers. I enjoyed covering the world with you and all these leaders here. Piers, thank you very much. Piers Morgan.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.